Today, as the title implies, we are going to try to fix it in the mix. And of course, this is something that you were always told not to do. Do not try to fix something in the mix. You should always try and get it right at the source, which of course is good advice. But I just wanted to see how far we could push that today. And we're going to take my snare that I've gotten many compliments on. It has always sounded great for me. This is the Ludwig Galaxy Acrolite. We are going to deliberately make it sound bad, and then we're going to see if we can fix it in the mix. So the first thing we're going to do here is I'm just going to take this key and I'm just going to make some random turns on here and see if I can get this drum to sound notably bad, just bad in the room, and then we'll take it into the computer. I will try, if I can, to fix it in the mix. It pained me to do it, but the deed has been done, and this drum definitely sounds bad. So all that's left to do is record a groove, and then we'll take it into the computer and see what we can do. All right, so here we are at the computer, and if it seems like there's some discontinuity, it's because I actually recorded the first part of this video like a month ago, and then I mixed this like 2 weeks ago, and now here I am, and I'm sick today, so anyways, bear with me. Let's look at what I've got going on mix-wise here. So first thing, just to address this elephant in the room, there's a pretty easy way I can get it to sound like this. Now you're thinking, wait a second, that's not what it sounded like at the beginning of the video. Yes, in this example here, I've added this channel, which is snare trigger. So this is something that I felt like I should just bring up, which is that you can, of course, just use a sample, which people feel very strongly about one direction or another. But if you have a poor snare recording, the option is open to you to use a sample. This is one that I recorded. This is the dial tune snare. So we're not going to use it in this case, but I just wanted to put that out there. That's sort of the obvious option where if your back's against the wall and you don't have any other good options and you really just have a terrible sounding recording, you can use the sample or blend a sample in with the original recording. So anyways, let's listen to what we've got here without the sample. Little less epic, but let's look at what we got going on here. So first thing I did, we'll dig into just the snare close mics. And first thing I did on snare top and bottom, just to kind of prepare them, is I used a gate, which I like to use gatey weighty. Used gatey weighty on both of them. I then on the snare top here, let's dig into that. Got some EQ going on. I'm scooping out some low mids, and then I'm also pulling out what I'm identifying as problematic frequencies that are ringing too much, especially in the mids and low mids. This is what tends to happen with snares that are tuned poorly, is that you'll get these really ringy specific frequencies, and not like kind of in the good way where sometimes a really high-pitched, well-tuned snare will ring in a way that's really pleasing. Typically, that'll actually have a fairly even scattering of frequencies. The problem starts to happen when you get these really, really distinct notes. That tends to be where things start to go awry. So for example, if I invert this one here, you can hear what I'm pulling out of there. Same thing with that low one. With the snare bottom, also gating it, and then just taking out a bunch of bottom end and a bunch of low mids, and then a little bit of top end as well. Okay, so let's hear it without all this extra stuff that I've added, then we'll add it back in one by one. Not great. So first step here is using a Waves Pultec. This is the Puig Tech, and I'm just scooping out a bunch of mid-range here at 500 Hertz. That's a very common move for me. So this makes it sound like this.
A lot of room sound and a lot of ugly room sound I find tends to come from the 500 hertz range. So this is just cleaning up a bunch of that. And then here with this Pultec, the other side, the high and low end, I am both boosting and cutting. I'm boosting around 8K and then cutting around 20 so that it doesn't get too sizzly. Then I'm also doing some boosting and cutting in the low end. I'm really kind of leaning into this smiley face EQ idea with this snare. I tend to find that if you're going to properly utilize mid-range, you really want a well-tuned snare, or a snare that sounds good on its own. Okay, next is this Q3D. This is made by Volco Audio. I got it for free. I don't think it's free anymore, but man, I love this EQ for pretty much everything. And you can just see I'm making a few moves here, boosting up some 160. I'm kind of surprised that I did that. Taking out even more low mids around 650, then adding in a little bit of sizzle at the top. I guess I just needed to get some body back in the snare, so that's the 160 bump there. Then here's an interesting one. H-comp, I've talked about this trick before. You'll notice that I'm using H-comp, which is a waves compressor, and I have the ratio at 1, so it's not actually doing any compression. What I'm doing is I'm using one of these emulated analog circuits, and I found that for drums, actually for everything, but for drums in particular, using number 3 on here does something really distinct. It kind of takes all the life out of a drum. And sometimes that's a bad thing, and sometimes that's a really good thing. So see if you can hear what's going on. So it'll just have a lot more like life and it'll sound more organic without this in there, but because it sounded like crap to begin with, we kind of want to make it sound more sample-like. We sort of want to take the life out of the snare. That's a fun trick. It also does something weird on guitars, but it does kind of the opposite on guitars. It makes guitars sound even gnarlier. So here I must have also identified some problem frequencies. So let's see what's going on here. If I invert this, I think that was sticking out. Same thing here. I actually might leave this in. This is sort of the low fundamental of the snare, and I don't know, it was bugging me for some reason, but I feel like I could almost leave that in. It might be better. Yeah, I don't know. I'll leave it in for now. Next, I'm doing a couple different layers of distortion or saturation. And the purpose for this is that, again, because I don't want any particular frequencies poking out, because that's what this drum is going to tend towards, being as poorly tuned as it is, I'm trying to spread out all of those frequencies and add harmonics in a way that it sort of masks all the bad sounding stuff that's ringing out. So I've got Fab Filter Saturn II, and you can see that I've got a crossover frequency, so above 600 hertz, so kind of only in the top end, I'm doing some saturation. And it's subtle enough to where it almost just sounds like an EQ bump. It almost just sounds like I'm boosting the high end, but it kind of does it in a way that, again, spreads out those frequencies, or adds harmonics in a way that the frequencies sound like they're spread out. Then I'm going to lo-fi here, adding some saturation distortion. Now, you might actually think that that sounds worse, and maybe for your project, maybe that actually does sound worse. I kind of like leaning into a more distorted snare sound because it really does take the focus off of how poorly the snare is tuned. And depending on the track, I mean, I love distorted snares. Again, depending on what the song is. Like, if I was demoing this snare, I would never mix it like this. But if I was doing sort of like a crunchy, like rock track, then this might be a cool move. Finally, I've got some pretty intense 1176 compression going on, but then I'm dialing back the mix knob to 50. Just so that you're getting a lot of smack and not really thinking too much about the tone of the drum itself. And then finally, I rarely do this. I very rarely put a reverb effect on the snare itself, But in this sort of situation, I felt like a reverb would help, again, sort of mask what's going on. And just make it sound like it was a little better recorded than it actually was. So here's what the snare sounds like. Now, I wouldn't hear this and be like, oh my God, that's the best snare of all time, but it does sound significantly better than this. Way better, way better. And in fact, if I heard this in a track, I don't think that I would know that someone had just wrenched on it and completely detuned the snare in such a weird way. So let's look real quick at the overheads in the room, because those are an important part of the sound. They are also recording your snare. So you want to make moves on your overheads and your rooms that are going to similarly help you out. But I'm going to go quick here because otherwise this is going to be a really long video. So I'm just removing some of the body of the snare and taking out some low end, taking out a bunch of mids, similar sorts of moves that I did with the snare close mic. Same sort of thing, boosting and cutting the high end on the overheads, and then adding a little distortion or saturation. Sounds like this. Let me add them in one at a time. Kind of evens things out. The room. I'm actually not thrilled with how the room came out. I really didn't spend a ton of time mixing this, to be perfectly honest. But here's what the room sounds like dry. And with some EQ. And then the whole thing sounds like this. Got some tape emulation going on for the whole kit. I've got some more compression. And then I've got this guy just doing some final tweaking. So, you tell me, did we fix it in the mix? Did we even partially fix it in the mix? Personally, getting to the end here, I feel like if someone had sent this to me and this was all I had to work with, I would be pretty happy with how far we were able to take it. But honestly, I think I would probably supplement this sound with a sample. I think I would take a well-recorded sample that I had created and I would layer it in here. But there's nothing necessarily wrong with using just the sound that we got. I mean, look at tons of famous recordings. Look at Superstition by Stevie Wonder. Love that song, but listen to that snare and tell me that that is not a poorly tuned snare, but it totally works in that track. So sort of what works and what doesn't work and what needs to be fixed and what doesn't need to be fixed is somewhat context dependent and is really up to your personal preference. But I want to know from you how you felt about this particular situation. How did you feel about the sound beforehand? And how well do you think I was able to fix it in the mix? I'd also love to just know what your thoughts are on this topic philosophically in the comments. So let me know. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.